Hi, this is Mr. Curtis, and today what we're going to be talking about is deer. Now, I want to make this perfectly clear to everybody that this is going to be a subject not just for the hunter, because if you look at the statistics in Wisconsin, about 10% of the population is considered a hunter. That means 90% of the population around here isn't doing any deer hunting. So, to be talking about a subject that would be just for hunting, I think would be a mistake. There's a lot of things about deer that we can learn that affect the whole ecology. Now, this is a picture that I always like to start with because almost every time I show this picture, I get the same reaction, and that is, "Aw, Bambi!" And there's so much about this picture that is just false. It's untrue. You know, first of all, you've got everything over here. You've got these lovely animals, and everyone is smiling, and everybody is happy, and everybody in the forest is one big happy group. There's nobody that doesn't get along. We all live together in one beautiful, harmonious area, and this could be the farthest thing from the truth. This isn't what goes on in nature. Hardly at all. This is what goes on in nature. Nature is about fighting. It's about competing. It's about survival of the fittest. Every animal in the forest is either fighting against another one of its species or it's competing against another animal. So these deer are competing against other herbivores when it comes to food supply. These two are fighting for supply of does when it comes to breeding. So really the things that we see in Disney films are so far from the truth, and hopefully in the next few minutes we can clear up some of those things. You know, here's another example of how deer impact our lives. These deer, I believe this is taken in Colorado because I think these are mule deer. These deer, you know, eating in this guy's backyard. Well, I'm sure there's some people that say, "Well, those dumb deer are eating up all my food." Well, let's be honest. Who was there first? The deer. Well, we were second here. So it's really us intruding on their place to live that we need to remember. And without making a pun, this is how deer impact our lives. So, you know, this poor animal, as you can see, slammed right into this car, and all we see left is just the rear end. The rest of it has gone all the way through into the car here. And yeah, this guy did live through it. I want to ask you a question. How many car deer crashes occur in Wisconsin every year? So here are your choices. 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 car deer crashes, or none of the above. So on your sheet of paper, write down what you think the answer is and see if you're correct. Only two left. None of the above. How many car deer crashes? 40,000 car deer crashes a year. Now, this statistic comes from the fact that the DNR collects about 34,000 carcasses off of our roads every year. And not every car deer crash is reported. So maybe somebody was driving home late at night and they had a little too much to drink, and perhaps they didn't want to call the sheriff when they smashed a deer. Maybe some guy hit a deer and the thing ran away and he thought, oh, maybe it lived, and then, you know, it bled to death. So this is an estimate, because obviously there's a lot that aren't reported, but it's, you know, 34,000 carcasses are picked up every year in Wisconsin. That's a lot of car deer crashes. So for many people, the subject of deer can involve a lot of emotion. What we're going to try to do is look at things scientifically, starting with some facts. So beginning with some definitions. And some of these you may already know. An herbivore is any animal that eats mostly plants. Carnivores, well, they eat mostly meat. And then something called omnivores, they're plants and animal meat eaters. Now the question I have is, how do carnivores get their fruits and veggies? Because we've all seen in health class the food pyramid. So you've got your breads down here, and then you've got this, and at the very top is saturated fat. You're only supposed to eat a little of that. Well, this works the same for carnivores. They need their fruits and veggies. Where does that come from? Yes, the critters that they eat. The first thing that a carnivore will eat, if given the opportunity, is the guts. Yummy! And of course the guts are going to have the fruits and veggies. So here's a lion munching on a zebra, and the first thing this female is eating is the guts. That's where there's fruits and veggies. And it's also partially digested, so you don't have to work as hard. Yummy! Alright, some more definitions. Nocturnal, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, active at night. Some examples of animals like that: owls, raccoons, skunks. Diurnal are animals that are active during the day. Now, us humans are considered diurnal, even though, there are some people that have the graveyard shift that work 11 to 7 at night. But we are still considered diurnal. Well, deer are neither of these. Deer are something called crepuscular. And that means that they are active at dawn and dusk. Now, I want you to think about this. How does this affect us as humans? Well, I want you to consider this. What about when people are driving to and from work during rush hour? Well, rush hour is early in the morning and early in the evening, dawn and dusk. So right when deer are most active, happens to be people most active out on the roads. Deer are also categorized as ruminants. So they have a 4-chambered stomach, and it looks something like this. And what that means they do is they will eat fast and then they digest it later. So they'll wolf down their food, then go sit somewhere, and then they'll yak it back up and re-chew it and then swallow it a second time. Now, we as humans, what we like to do is we like to place our emotions on what's going on here. And we say, oh my gosh, that is so gross. They shouldn't do that. That is just the worst thing in the world. Well, you know what? We're placing our values on these animals. And we can't do that. Deer have their own way. And this, if you think about it, works out very well for the deer. They wolf the food down, oftentimes in places that are dangerous, and then they'll go hide someplace else and then regurgitate the food, chew it up later. And so for the deer, it's a very effective way of getting nutrients out of what they eat. Deer are also promiscuous. What does that mean? More than one mate. Well, again, we are going to place our values on this. Oh, that's not right. Those deer shouldn't do that. Well, it works for deer. Because if you think about it, you have one male, and then you have a whole bunch of females. And so it only takes one male to breed with a whole bunch of females. And if the one male dies over the winter, tough. So what? He's done his job. The females are now prego, as I like to say. And so they're carrying the fawns. So he is expendable. This elk, which is a relative of deer, oftentimes during the breeding season, these males, they will do nothing but breed and fight for the whole season, and they'll deplete their fat supply to the point where they cannot make it through the winter. And that's oftentimes what happens. They die off, but they've done their job. They've planted the seed for the future generations. Here's another thing many people don't know about deer. They live in what's called a female-dominated society. So it's the does that run the flock, if you want to call it, the herd. So when there's a bunch of deer that are eating and they find a food supply, let's say they find a bunch of food, it will be the does that will come in first and eat. And they'll eat that food first. Meanwhile, the fawns, they're hungry, and they want to get in there and eat. But what will happen is the does, they will chase the fawns out until they're full. They will not let the fawns eat. And so sometimes the fawns will starve. Now, in our society, we'd say, oh my gosh, that's terrible. We should take care of the children first. Well, not in deer society. In the deer society, the does take care of themselves first. Because if the does live, they can always have fawns the next year. If the fawns die because of the bad winter, well, so what? They die, we'll try again next year. The does will still be around. So in terms of ecology, this is very effective. In terms of values, we look at this and think, oh my gosh, this is just wrong. And then here's the other thing. Bucks are not a part of this group. The does will chase them out. The bucks have to be on their own. They're not allowed as part of this herd. So this is something that a lot of people don't realize about deer, is that, you know, they live in a world that's survival of the fittest. It's not this happy-go-lucky, we're all living in Disney kind of world. So deer also have something called antlers, which means they grow and shed these things on their heads every year, as opposed to horns, like this from a pronghorn antelope. They don't shed every year. So they just keep growing year after year after year. Some other members of the deer family, the moose, and what I mentioned before, the elk. Anyone know the real name for elk? They're called wapiti. And lastly, caribou. All right, I want to walk through what happens with deer during the 4 seasons of the year. So in the spring, basically, they will eat anything that's green. They're hungry, they're coming out of the winter. You know, they're not going to eat everything that's green, but if they can find new grasses and clovers and things like that, they're going to spring up, that's what they're going to eat. And then also the males begin to grow these antlers. And when they're growing at this stage, you notice that they are very rounded, and even though the picture is fuzzy, they too are fuzzy. They're full of blood and they're very soft and can be damaged during this time. Scientists think that antler tissue is one of the fastest growing tissues in the animal kingdom. Also in the spring, fawns are born. And again, in terms of ecology, this is perfect. If they're born in the spring, then they've got spring, summer, and most of the fall to grow to get ready for the tough season, which is the winter. Now, in the summer, they have this really thin red coat. Now, this animal is actually what's called a key deer. It is found in Florida, it's endangered, and it's really tiny. It's about the size of a medium-sized dog. Now, in the fall, these antlers will begin to harden, and this is a trophy deer. And also in the fall, their fur changes from red to brown, and the hairs are hollow. And the reason for that is it's better insulation. So if you were to look at a deer hair under a microscope, you would see that the center of it is hollow. And so that little pocket of air in the middle here, that acts as insulation. It's no different than the window panes in your house. So if you were to look at the window panes, you have, this represents the glass, you have sometimes double or some of them are even triple window panes with a little pocket of air between them all. Well, that air acts as insulation. So it works the same with deer. That pocket of air acts as insulation for both. Now, deer will continue to eat green stuff in the fall, but when given the opportunity, they go to these food choices. Acorns, corn, soybeans, and become a priority. The reason is they are really high in nutrients and high in calories. Also in the fall, you have something called the mating season, which they refer to as the rut. Don't know where that name comes from, but that's what it's called. Now, in the winter, this is the tough time of the year for the deer. That's why it's called the bottleneck. So if you think about a bottleneck, for example, oops, let me go back here. So if you think about a bottleneck, for example, it's a tight spot that kind of confines things as it tries to come through. Well, the wintertime is a tight season for deer because it really puts pressure on them. And some of them will lose up to 30% of your weight. So imagine this. Let's say you weigh 120 pounds and you lost 30% of your weight. Let's do the math on that one quickly. So how much weight is that? Imagine losing 36 pounds if you weighed 120 pounds. That's a lot of weight. Also in the wintertime, the deer, this is mostly up north, in northern Wisconsin, the deer will switch to a diet of something called browse. So imagine eating the ends of twigs, because that's all you can find is the ends of twigs. And also in the winter and early spring, the antlers are shed. Now, I want to take a few moments here and talk about parasites, because deer have oftentimes lots of parasites. First, a definition. A parasite is something that lives off another living thing and causes harm to its host. Kind of like you and your parents. You know, you live off your parents and cause harm to them? Or not. How about some deer parasites? Ticks. Oh, lovely ticks. Look at this thing. He's absolutely gorged on blood. Yuck. And then if you look at this picture, this is gross. Look down here on the inside of this deer's leg. All of those dots there, those are all ticks. Absolutely infested with ticks. Yuck. Liver flukes. Yes, these are flatworms that will infest and get into the liver of a deer. I personally would not eat the liver of a deer simply because what if you ran into those suckers? Yuck. Tapeworm. Yummy, yum, yummy. So you have these nasty big worms that can sometimes get into and infect you. And they also infect deer. Now here's something crazy about tapeworms. You used to be able to buy tapeworm eggs. Look at this ad. You want to lose fat, all you had to do is buy one of these things. Sanitized tapeworms. Easy to swallow, I bet. No ill effects. Yes, sure, I bet. So think about what happens here. In your intestines, you'd have one of these tapeworms that would start to grow after you swallow the pill. Well, that's all fine and dandy when you get one tapeworm growing, but what can happen is one tapeworm can break off and this other section then will start to attach and it will start growing in you, and then this thing breaks off and this thing breaks off, and soon your whole intestine is full of tapeworms. This can be deadly. This can kill you. And so to say no ill effects, yeah, that's not going to happen. This is very, very nasty stuff. Now, the question is, if you ever get them, how do you get rid of them? Because they live inside your intestines and they have a chemical on the outside of them that protects them from being digested themselves. And then what they do is they eat the partially digested food that you provide for them. How do you get rid of them? Well, you have to take a medicine that eliminates that chemical on the outside, and then your body will just digest the tapeworm, and then you get rid of it. Okay, so that is what we have today on deer and parasites, and I thought I'd end with a lovely picture of the end. And if you look closely at this picture, those would happen to be tapeworms. And what are we looking at? Yeah, that's a dog's butt. The end. We'll see you next time.